back to the automation generation, everybody. On the last podcast, we were talking a little bit about discovery, a little bit about demonstration, but we started to go into a bit more detail around one of the roles our business process consultants, what they do in terms of creating statements of works, writing out user stories, writing out process maps. And we'd invited Josh, our head of technology, onto that podcast, and I've invited him back today to expand a little bit further on that process. So to talk about the steps that come next. But if you could just start off by introducing yourself again, Josh, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Josh, head of technology at Spectrum. I've been with the organisation for 11 years now, working through right from the beginning of delivering automation solutions to our customer all the way to the point where I am now, which is looking after our automation teams, making sure we have the right technologies in place, also supporting our product portfolios so that we're not falling behind in times of technology where everything is advancing so fast and changing so fast. We want to make sure that we're at the forefront of the cutting edge technologies that we can implement in business. So that's also a key part of my role.
Okay, great. Yeah, excellent. So I think last time we left it on doing some handovers, making sure that our teams knew everybody within the client's teams and those sorts of things. I think our customers often have visibility of that business process consultant's role because it's quite a customer-facing role, and they've kind of gone through those workshops and they've worked quite closely with the customer to come up with a statement of works and certainly to sign that document off, and so it's quite a visible role. It's probably a bit of a lull, as you mentioned earlier, after that, in terms of we're then taking that statement of works away, and in the background, once we've got infrastructure provisioned and all those sorts of things, the automation teams are starting to configure the solution so that it can be handed over for testing. So talk to me a little bit about a kind of a day in the life of a automation consultant in the background when they're going off and configuring a solution via one of those statements of works. What kind of things do they get up to?
Yeah, so I guess starting kind of right at the beginning of the process, we've almost got that statement of work signed off. Our automation teams are getting ready to start the delivery, but what's really important to start with first is that everyone understands that statement of work. Everyone's got the full picture of what the business process consultant, the customer, had in their mind for the delivery before we actually start that work. So what we do is we adopt some agile methodologies in the team for how we refine our work, how we review it, how we go ahead and deliver that. So right at the beginning of the process is what we call refinement, which is where the team get together. We work in kind of cross-functional scrum teams as part of our organisation, where we've got a mixture of different skill sets for different products, as well as different technologies and different kind of processes as well. In there, we've got a business process consultant and usually 2 or more automation engineers. So what they do is they sit down with that statement of work together and they go through each of those user stories in the process map, and they ask questions and understand, how do we go ahead and deliver this? What's in the mind's eye of the business process consultant and customer? And it's our first point for our automation engineers to raise those questions. Actually, there's a requirement here that we're not entirely sure of. Can we go back and seek some more information? Or did the business process consultant already have something in mind on how we might achieve that?
So I guess that refinement process has got to be quite important, because there's a big thing about knowledge transfer, isn't there? And if you just passed over the statement of works from the business process consultant straight to the automation engineers without actually allowing them to ask any questions or gain any further context, there could well be a difference in what the automation engineer's reading and what the business process consultant meant.
100%. And that's the key part is, words on a piece of paper. And this is why we do a review with the actual customer itself with a statement of work to make sure that we get our point across and what we understand and put on the paper. The same the other way is really important for the automation engineers, because what a solution could look like based on your knowledge and interpretation, not knowing the customer, could be a very different solution, actually living and feeling and seeing how that customer operates and how they might work as well. So really important part of that process. Often there's nothing major that comes out of it, but we just make sure the team is all on the same page for how they're going to go about delivering that.
Okay, great. So refinement's one step. What else do they do?
Yeah, so from there, we then kind of start off delivery. So as part of refinement, we then point out anything that we think needs to be done up front. So we call them spikes within our teams. As far as software development goes, it's maybe not the meaning of a spike, but we use spikes as a purpose of saying we've understand all these prerequisites that we need to maybe get on with first before we can start delivery. So what that's really important to do is that we don't then pick up the actual user story and requirement, start work on it, and find out we get blocked. We can't deliver that because we didn't get infrastructure sorted first, or we didn't do data discovery first, or maybe we didn't get the right information from the customer, or whatever it might be. So we iron out all those spikes, those tasks up front. We then get our automation engineers starting with those, whether it's liaising with third-party IT, customer contacts, whatever it might be that we need to kind of get on with that solution. And that's the other really kind of important part with our automation engineers that might differ from different organizations who deliver automation solutions. We don't lock them in a cupboard and keep them out of the way of the sight of our customers. It's really important to me as kind of the lead of the automation engineers and to the business that we get them interacting with the customer, get them experiencing the problems that they're having and what they need from their solution, and also get them to have that support the other way, that we can then deliver that with them. The automation engineers, being the ones that have inevitably built the solution, are the ones that are training and testing with the customer to make sure that they're as close as possible. We don't want to hide them away and have that feeling from customers that there's this development team that sit away that no one can interact with, or that feature requests or a bad word. Getting nice and close keeps that process nice and smooth as well.
Yeah, and that's got to be really important, because they're the people that are configuring the software to the needs of that statement of works, and so they probably are the best place to be able to kind of explain how it should work and what it should look like, and to interact with the customer about whether the requirement was met or not, I suppose.
Absolutely, and to provide options, because each way there's different interpretations and there's always different ways that we can deliver something as well. So having that conversation, almost a technical person to the customer, and our automation engineers are really good at translating that from not just talking technical gibberish with our customers, but getting down to process level and discussing the options at a process level to help make sure that we are delivering it in the best possible way for the customer. So that's kind of where we then start on that delivery process, is those spike tasks of getting infrastructure provisioned or any data requirements. And then what we do is we start the full-on delivery. And each of our Scrum teams, each of our delivery teams operate on weekly or every 2-week sprints. So we pile in the work for that. We kind of estimate it across the team to make sure that we're not over-scheduling them and that we're not over-committing ourselves to the customer. They then start the work on that and continue to work on that until the end of that particular sprint. Okay. What we tend to try and do as well is we'll break those sprints up so we're achieving something that we can get the customer working with at the end of that sprint, ideally, so that we're not just disappearing for 6 months or weeks or whatever it might be and then coming back and saying, here's your finished solution. We'll try and break the solution out into logical segments that we can get the customer to start working with. So as part of that process, we'll start with daily scrums with the teams, that they've got an opportunity to raise any issues, concerns, anything that's blocking them to the BPC. Hopefully then being able to release those blockers, get in touch with the customer if there's that necessary kind of requirement there. But ultimately, if everything goes well, we're reviewing that every day with the team. We're delivering that every day throughout that sprint. And then by the end of it, we're reviewing that internally first. So we don't want to then release that out to the wild to the customer straight away. The BPC gets kind of a check gate there to make sure that everything's met in terms of the requirements, the acceptance criteria are met, it meets the kind of image that they had in the mind for the solution. And then as soon as everything's passed at that point, we then start to schedule that point with the customer where we kick off an element of the training and UAT process. And like I mentioned there, we try and break that up into logical elements so that it's not a big bang of a whole solution all in one go. Here's loads to learn. Let's take a small element first and get the customer working with that.
Okay, so just building on a couple of things you said there. So you're saying that you're kind of planning out the work in sprints and in weekly or two weekly sprints. And as I understand it, the way that you kind of schedule that work is back to the user stories again, isn't it? So
absolutely.
Yeah, so those user stories in that statement of works have then gone through that refinement process. They've got acceptance criteria on there. The team have estimated how much time each of them should take.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at that sprint, then you're deciding, right, this is how many user stories we can get through in that 1 week sprint or that 2 week sprint, given based on the amount of time that you've estimated they'd take, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you're trying to deliver a minimum viable product at the end of that. So it might be, often our solutions can be kind of split into phases or parts, can't they? So you might have a element of document capture, intelligent document processing up front. You might then have an element of workflow. After that, query handling, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so is that a natural kind of split in some projects, is to kind of do that capture bit first and that?
Yeah, 100%. And when you're working with solutions that have an element of intelligent document capture, that's often the place that ultimately the process, it makes logical sense to start start with, because it's documents coming into the system, it's data extraction, and you can't really make any decisions of the process until you've got that data. So getting the customer interacting with that part of the solution not only gets them starting to work with it, gets them asking questions, gets them understanding what might happen, also buys us some time to continue the build behind the scenes for the next element, so that there's less of a waiting period between each of those segments. Getting that kind of hands-on experience as well means that we're not in a period of, here's all the training in one go, now here's a really long period of testing, and as things happen, businesses get busy, people get sidetracked on other roles. It's just a fact of life. The more we can kind of drip feed that information, drip feed the delivery, the more it's likely to stick into the day-to-day kind of change cycle that customers are going to go through for adopting a new process, than just trying to go big bang as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So picking up a couple of things you said there, one thing about training and one thing about testing. So who is it from our end that's doing the training? Is that the automation engineers as well?
Yeah, so we break that out. So once we've done delivery and we start kind of rolling something out to our customers, we do 2 sessions, what we call a demo, because what we don't want to do again is throw too much at the customer in one go. We want to show what we've got so far, get some initial feedback. Does it feel like something's missing? Does it feel like we're on the right track? And then once we've got feedback from there, that's when we then start an actual training session. So we get into deeper understanding of the features, the functionality, what button presses users need to take, and then we start a user acceptance process. And those 2 sessions depend on, I guess, the technologies that I use, but both of those include the BPC, because they're the one that gathered the requirements in the first place. They're going to be the ones that are closer to making sure that the customers, understanding that we've ticked off those requirements. But it's also that automation engineer or multiple automation engineers, depending on the technologies delivered, that are delivering the training to the customer, which is what I mentioned earlier in terms of, if we get the technical people actually delivering the solution to the customer, it builds that relationship between them as well, that it's not a one person is your point of contact for the solution delivery. You've got this support network behind you, even just in the delivery of the solution, that can help go through that change cycle, go through any issues that you might be occurring through the solution, and really kind of support you as much as we can.
Okay, yeah, so you've got that idea of having kind of like almost like a conference room pilot-y type thing to start off with, a bit of a demonstration of
absolutely
this is what it's looking like, getting some early feedback. I suppose there might be some tweaks at that point as well from that feedback.
Yeah.
So that when it's getting into the hands of the end user, by the time it's got there, you've gone through, quite a rigorous process in terms of that scoping process and that refinement and everything else, so that really they should be getting the best possible result from all that hard work by the point there where they actually have to start doing the testing and everything else.
Absolutely. And I didn't mention in terms of delivery, but it's really important when you mentioned there about the rigorous process. Excuse me. Before I carry on.
Yeah. 14 minutes, cool. Perfect, thank you.
So it's really important that you mentioned there about the rigorous process. The process we take, not only in refining and scoping, but also in testing. Before we release that off to the customer, we're testing against each one of those acceptance criteria to make sure that we're comfortable that every one of those process paths, every one of those requirements is met before we give it to the customer. But ultimately, things are going to come about, either requirements change or there's something that's missed as part of that delivery. So we pass that over to the customer to start doing a tracker of reporting any issues against the acceptance criteria themselves. So that, again, we're tracking against those requirements again.
Yeah, so when you've got a user story, you might have multiple acceptance criteria on that user story, and those acceptance criteria actually then start to build your kind of testing paths. So you can say, based on this user story, can the user do X, Y, and Z? And if they can see that on screen and they can do those 3 things, then that user story can be kind of ticked off as being achieved, as it were.
Absolutely, and it's almost a yes and no. When the acceptance criteria says, does the system do this, or can I do this? The user is saying, yes, I can tick that off, 100% I can achieve that. We move on to the next requirement, we check that, we inspect it, and it almost gives that list of requirements to go through. And it's not just a free-for-all testing period where we go test, do what you want, see if you can break it. We've got more of a rigid process against that to make sure that everyone's comfortable that we've met the requirements and that the solution's stable, because the last thing we want to do is deliver a solution that's not stable to our customers.
Yeah, it's got to be really valuable to the end users, having a list of things. Here's a list of things that I need to check are working with very kind of clear outcomes, rather than it just be saying, put 10 invoices into the system and does it work kind of thing. You need to be able to test all that kind of custom configuration you've done, and if you've done a lot of it, then that works in the way that you expect it to, as per the statement of works and as per those user stories.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense how it all flows through, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And again, it makes sure that we are following those edge cases in testing as well, because when you are taking a process on, then the instinct is, well, my day-to-day is this process. But actually, you then neglect the processes that are the edge cases or the requirements, and using those user stories and acceptance criteria helps guide that into making sure we don't miss those, and then end up when that edge case does arise at some point in the future, actually there's an unexpected behavior because it wasn't fully tested or as tested as it possibly could have been as part of that process.
Okay, great. And yeah, with the best will in the world, I'm assuming there's still going to be change requests that come out of that testing period.
Absolutely.
Things that naturally haven't been uncovered, or suddenly when you start testing through something, one of the users will say, "Oh, have we thought about this?" Which is just you can't cover everything 100% of the time, can you? So what does that kind of change request process look like?
Yeah, so we try and be as flexible with change requests as possible. What we don't want to do is say in that very waterfall way, well, no, this is what the scope was. Unfortunately, you're going to have to go live with the solution as it is. We'll try and understand what the requirements are, but also prioritize those with the customer. Really how much of an impact is this particular requirement that you've raised? Is it a large proportion of your invoices if it's invoice automation, or is it quite an edge case? And try and prioritize that with the customer. Could we go live as we are? Do we need to delay the go live? Is it kind of a huge requirement? So once we've kind of, I guess, ascertained the priority, we'll then break that out into the specific detail like we would have done with the previous requirements at the initial scoping period. Again, same review process, get the customer to sign that off to make sure we've understood it. Team will refine it. We'll then deliver that requirement as well, depending on where that fits in the delivery cycle. So while they're testing an element of the solution, we can be going back over and making some of those changes. We'll also quote for those if they're outside of the scope of the project, because ultimately, we gave that original estimate based on what the requirements were and the scope was that we detailed before. If large requirements come out that are quite significant effort, we might need to re-quote for those. But at the same time, if it's minor adjustments, can you change this label here? Can you move this slightly to the left? Whatever it might be, we can make those without necessarily having to put a lot of documentation and process and cost behind those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't want to slow the project down with lots of small change requests, do you, in terms of asking whether it's possible to go live without these kind of requests? But you want to meet as many of those requests as you possibly can for the customer. But as you say, some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them should be chargeable, and some of them shouldn't be chargeable. And I suppose that's part of the decision-making process for the customer, isn't it? They're going to know what priority those items are and how often it affects them, and they can make a logical decision on whether it makes sense to go ahead with that or not.
And that's it, that kind of cost versus benefit ratio as well is really important for that, because what might seem quite a small change, actually, when you get into the nitty-gritty of, well, we need all these extra prerequisites around the edges or this configuration around the edges to make that happen, it suddenly grows arms and legs into a larger requirement. Then when you consider it's maybe 1 or 2 documents a month in the process, maybe isn't worthwhile. But we'll also try and position options. This is the most automated option that you might want to go with, but also this is the a way of achieving that with some user intervention still, but not as much user intervention as it might be in the current build of the solution.
Yeah, it'll make some level of sense. Great. I think that's kind of the end of the process almost, isn't it? After the user acceptance testing, once you've signed that off and the customer's happy to go live, it's then a pass off to the next team, isn't it? It's a pass off to the support team, really. And there's obviously important steps internally for us to make sure that the support team know about that specific solution and how they're going to support it. But it very much does become the project team moves on to the next project, and the support team kind of deal with the day-to-day. Was my understanding right with that?
Yeah, so there's only maybe one small kind of deviation from that, and again, it's customer specific. What we do is we offer a service called hypercare, where we might then have our delivery teams offer a period of time after you've gone live to make sure that we're close by, keeping that responsiveness. As the ones that are ultimately building the solution, we can make sure we're a bit more reactive, a bit more aware of the solution, to help with that, again, with that change cycle, the adoption for users during a fixed period of time, and then we then hand that over to the support team, who then look after the solution from an ongoing basis.
Okay.
If the customer hasn't taken hypercare, we'll transition that, agree to go live with the customer. That'll be our cut-off point for handing it over to the support team. And as you mentioned, our implementation teams are almost then on to the next project where they start that cycle again. Maybe it's the same process, maybe it's something completely different. And ultimately, for our automation engineers and business process consultants, it's one of the most engaging parts of the role is having something different to work on almost every cycle of projects. There's never a dull moment because everything is varied in business ultimately.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today, Josh. I hope that's given our viewers some insight into maybe some of the back office processes that aren't always obvious, and also those people that maybe are thinking about engaging in a project with us, giving them some insight into what they can expect to happen during that project process. So please join us on our next podcast when we'll be talking about sales order processing. So a lot of what I've been talking to JB and to Josh about over the last few podcasts has been fairly focused on invoice processing. A lot of what we do is around intelligent document processing, and sales order processing is definitely a growth area for us. So we'll look forward to talking to you more about that soon.